I walked into that ICU room expecting to surprise my son with homemade cookies, and instead found him unconscious, hooked up to machines, fighting for his life after a massive heart attack. But his wife Nora wasn't crying by his bedside. She was in the Maldives, posting Instagram stories with another man. Spending David's money like water. So I did what any loving mother would do. I froze every single bank account he'd ever given her access to. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me back up and tell you how I got here. Because this story starts 3 months earlier, when I should have seen the warning signs. But when you're 68 years old and your son is your whole world, you tend to ignore the red flags, especially when they're being waved by a daughter-in-law who smiles while she sharpens her knives. It was a Tuesday in June when Nora called me, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness I'd grown to recognize. "Margaret, darling, David's been working so hard lately. I'm planning a little getaway for us, just to help him relax." I should have asked questions then. Should have wondered why she needed my credit card information just in case of emergencies while they were traveling. Instead, like the fool I was, I handed over my financial information to a woman who'd been systematically isolating my son from me for 2 years. Oh, she was clever about it. Never anything dramatic, just little comments here and there. "Your mother seems tired, honey. Maybe we shouldn't burden her with dinner this week." Or my personal favorite, "Margaret's getting a bit forgetful, isn't she? Perhaps we should limit her access to the grandchildren." The grandchildren? Emma, 8, and little Jake, 5. 2 beautiful souls I barely saw anymore because Auntie Nora always had better plans for them. Plans that somehow never included Grandma. But I digress. The point is, I gave her access to my emergency account, the one with $50,000 I'd been saving for David's future, for the grandkids' college funds, for medical emergencies. The irony isn't lost on me now. 3 months later, here I am, standing in a sterile hospital room, watching my son fight for his life while his wife is halfway around the world, probably toasting her good fortune with champagne and her boyfriend's charm. The nurses told me David had been alone when he collapsed at work. Alone. No wife rushing to his side, no frantic phone calls to family. Just my unconscious son and a voicemail on his phone from Nora saying she'd call back later. Because she was dealing with a time zone issue. Time zone issue. That's what she called abandoning her husband during a medical crisis. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, my fingers surprisingly steady as I navigated to the account management section. Technology might not be my strong suit, but I learn fast when I'm motivated. And nothing motivates like righteous fury mixed with a mother's protective instincts. Account frozen. Transaction history downloaded. And then I did something that surprised even me. I called my old friend Patricia, the one who'd become a private investigator after her divorce. If Nora thought she could play games with my family's money while my son lay dying, she was about to learn that this old woman had more fight left in her than she'd ever imagined. The phone started ringing exactly 47 minutes after I froze the accounts. I know because I was timing it, sitting in that uncomfortable hospital chair, watching David's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision while I waited for Nora's world to come crashing down. "Margaret?" Her voice was strained, panic creeping around the edges of her usual composure. "There seems to be some problem with the cards. Everything's being declined." "Oh dear," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "How inconvenient for you. Where did you say you were again?" There was a pause. A long one. I'm at a spa retreat. For my anxiety. You know how worried I get about David's work stress. Spa retreat. Right. That's what she was calling the 5 Seasons resort in the Maldives, where my private investigator friend had already confirmed she'd checked in 3 days ago with a male companion. A male companion who definitely wasn't my son, considering David had been working 12-hour days at the law firm all week. "Which spa?" I asked sweetly. "I might recommend it to the ladies at my book club." Another pause. Longer this time. "It's very exclusive. You probably wouldn't have heard of it." "Try me," I said, watching a nurse check David's 4. "I'm more worldly than you give me credit for." The silence stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "Margaret, what's this really about? Why are the accounts frozen?" "Well, darling," I said, using her favorite condescending endearment right back at her, "when I arrived at the hospital and found my son unconscious and alone, with no idea where his loving wife might be, I thought it best to secure his financial assets. You understand, medical bills can be so expensive." "You had no right." "Actually, I had every right. Funny thing about joint accounts, Nora, when my name is on them as an emergency contact and co-signer, I can do whatever I deem necessary to protect my son's interests. And spending his money on luxury vacations while he's fighting for his life doesn't seem to be in his best interests, does it?" I could hear her breathing, could practically see her calculating her next move. Nora was many things. Manipulative, cold, calculating. But she wasn't stupid. She knew she'd been caught. I was planning to come back immediately when I heard. When you heard what, exactly? I interrupted. Because as far as I can tell, the hospital has been trying to reach you for 18 hours. Your phone seems to work fine for Instagram posts. Though, lovely sunset shots, by the way. The Maldives look beautiful this time of year. The sharp intake of breath told me she'd realized I knew exactly where she was, and with whom. Margaret, you don't understand the situation. Oh, but I do, I said, pulling up the screenshots Patricia had sent me an hour earlier. I understand that you've been planning this little getaway for weeks. I understand that you've already spent $12,000 of David's money on this trip. And I understand that Kyle Morrison is quite the handsome companion for such an exclusive spa retreat. The phone went dead. I smiled. I tucked my phone away and reached for David's hand. His skin was warm, which the doctor said was a good sign. His wedding ring caught the fluorescent light, a simple gold band he'd worn faithfully for 10 years. 10 years of marriage to a woman who couldn't even be bothered to stay in the same hemisphere when he needed her most. My phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then another. I ignored them all and settled in for what I suspected would be a very long night. David needed his mother now. And unlike his wife, I wasn't going anywhere. By morning I had 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and one very interesting email from Patricia. Nora had spent the night frantically trying to reach me while simultaneously attempting to access funds from accounts I'd locked down tighter than Fort Knox. But the email from Patricia was the real treasure. Detailed surveillance photos that painted a picture worth far more than 1,000 words. Kyle Morrison, 35, personal trainer and aspiring model, had been Nora's fitness instructor for 8 months. The same 8 months during which she'd suddenly developed a passion for private training sessions that lasted 3 hours and somehow required overnight stays at luxury hotels. The receipts Patricia had obtained painted a fascinating timeline of my daughter-in-law's double life. Mrs. Thompson, a soft voice interrupted my reading. Dr. Martinez, David's cardiologist, approached with cautious optimism in his eyes. Your son is awake. I nearly dropped my phone. David's eyes were open, confused but alert, tracking the movement of nurses around his bed. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. Mom. His voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour earlier. I'm here, sweetheart. I took his hand, squeezing gently. You gave us quite a scare. He looked around the room, and I saw the moment reality hit him. Where's Nora? How do you tell your son, who just survived a massive heart attack, that his wife is living her best life in paradise with another man? How do you break that kind of news when his recovery depends on staying calm and stress-free? She's traveling, I said carefully. I've been here with you. David's brow furrowed. Traveling? But he struggled to sit up. I don't remember. The last thing I remember was being at the office and this crushing pain in my chest. You collapsed at work on Thursday afternoon, I explained gently. It's now Saturday morning. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days. The confusion in his eyes was heartbreaking. But Nora, she would have been here. She would have. He stopped, his gaze falling on the flowers I'd brought from my garden, the only flowers in the room. Mom, where's my wife? Before I could formulate an answer that wouldn't send his blood pressure skyrocketing, my phone rang. Nora's name flashed on the screen, and David's eyes locked onto it immediately. That's her, he said. Answer it, please. I looked at my son's hopeful face, then at the surveillance photos still open on my phone, showing his wife wrapped around another man on a beach that cost more money than most people made in a year. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Hello, Nora, I answered, putting the phone on speaker before David could object. Margaret, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all night. How is David? The hospital won't tell me anything because of privacy laws, and I'm trying to get a flight back, but everything's booked and... Slow down, I said calmly. David is awake and stable. He can hear you. David. Her voice pitched higher, more dramatic. Baby, I'm so sorry I'm not there. I'm stuck in this horrible place with no connectivity, and I just found out about your accident. Accident? I interrupted. Who told you it was an accident? Another pause. I meant his heart attack, of course. I misspoke because I'm so upset. David was watching me now, something shifting in his expression. He'd always been sharp, my son. A successful lawyer because he could read people and situations like books. And right now, he was reading the situation between his mother and his wife like the betrayal it was. Nora, he said quietly. His voice carrying a strength that surprised me given his condition. What horrible place are you stuck in? I thought you were at that yoga retreat in Phoenix. I watched my daughter-in-law's carefully constructed world begin to crumble through a hospital room phone speaker, and I realized that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be delivered gently. Sometimes it needs to arrive like a freight train, fast and impossible to ignore. The retreat moved. It's a traveling wellness program. But David wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at me. And in his eyes was a question I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Mom, David said after I'd hung up on Nora's increasingly frantic explanations. What aren't you telling me? I've been dreading this moment since I walked into his room. But looking at my son, pale, vulnerable, but with that familiar steel in his eyes that reminded me he was indeed my child. I realized he deserved the truth, or at least part of it. Your wife is not at a yoga retreat, I said simply. She's in the Maldives, has been for 3 days, since before your heart attack. David closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. His heart monitor showed elevated readings, and I reached for the call button. Don't, he said quietly. I'm not surprised, Mom. Disappointed, but not surprised. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? I've known something was off for months. The secretive phone calls, the new clothes, the sudden interest in fitness. He let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. My son had hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago, before I'd ever thought to call Patricia. And? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Kyle Morrison, personal trainer. They've been having an affair for 8 months. David's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a legal case rather than his marriage. What I didn't know was that she'd taken a vacation while I was dying. The monitor beeped steadily as we sat in silence, processing this revelation. My son wasn't just a victim. He was a man who'd been gathering evidence, planning his next move. The lawyer in him had taken over where the husband had failed. David, why didn't you? Because I was hoping I was wrong, he said, and because I wanted to handle it cleanly, legally. Divorce can get messy when there are assets involved. Assets, of course. David had done very well for himself as a corporate lawyer. The house, the investments, the life insurance policy, the trust fund I'd helped him establish for the children. Nora stood to gain quite a bit in a divorce, especially if she could prove emotional distress or claim he'd been an absent husband. But adultery was still adultery, and evidence was evidence. So what was your plan? I asked. David smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen since he'd woken up. Well, it was to gather enough evidence to protect my assets and ensure I kept custody of Emma and Jake. But now, he gestured weakly at the hospital room. Now, I think my plan just got a lot more interesting. How so? Because my loving wife just abandoned me during a medical emergency to continue her affair in paradise. Using my money, I assume? I nodded. She tried to spend $12,000 yesterday alone. I froze the accounts. You froze? David started laughing. Really laughing, despite the pain it clearly caused him. Mom, you magnificent woman, you froze her accounts while she was in the Maldives? She had access to your emergency funds. I removed that access. So she's stuck there? Well, she has whatever cash she brought, and whatever Kyle can afford. But her credit cards, debit cards, and access to your accounts? Completely frozen. David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him working through the implications. Mom, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to call my lawyer, Sandra Chen. Tell her it's time to move forward with the divorce papers we discussed. And tell her the situation has evolved. Evolved how? David's smile turned cold, and for a moment, I saw not my sweet boy, but the sharp attorney who'd built a successful practice by being 3 steps ahead of his opponents. Because abandonment during a medical emergency, adultery, and financial irresponsibility are going to make this divorce very one-sided in my favor. And the children are at my sister's house for the weekend, safe and sound, with no idea their mother is currently stranded in paradise with her boyfriend. I squeezed his hand. You've been planning this for a while. I've been hoping I wouldn't need to, he corrected. But yes, I've been prepared. What I wasn't prepared for was having a heart attack at 42. Or for my wife to be so callous about it. My phone buzzed with another call from Nora. We both looked at it. Should I answer? I asked. Absolutely, David said. But put it on speaker. I want to hear exactly how she plans to explain this one. Margaret, please, you have to help me. Nora's voice was strained. Desperate in a way I'd never heard before. I can't get home. The resort is demanding payment for the extended stay, and Kyle's card was declined, and I have no cash, and, slow down, I said, catching David's eye. He nodded for me to continue. You're saying you're trapped? Yes, the airline is demanding payment for ticket changes. The resort wants money for extra nights, and I can't access any of our accounts. Margaret, I know we've had our differences, but David needs me. I need to get home to my husband. David mouthed, wow, and shook his head. Nora, help me understand something, I said. You've been gone for 3 days. David had his heart attack on Thursday afternoon. It's now Saturday morning. When exactly were you planning to come home? The original trip was supposed to end tomorrow. I was going to surprise David by coming home a day early. I looked at David, who was silently applauding what was apparently another lie. According to Patricia's information, Nora had booked the trip for 10 days, not a long weekend. That's interesting, I said, because according to the resort's booking confirmation, you're scheduled to stay until next Thursday. That's 5 more days, Nora. Silence. Long, telling silence. How did you get that information? I finished. Darling, when you use joint credit cards to book romantic getaways with your personal trainer, that information becomes available to other cardholders. Did you think I wouldn't notice $12,000 charged to David's account in one day? Kyle is not Kyle Morrison, age 35, personal trainer at FitLife Gym. Aspiring model with a fairly impressive Instagram following. Shall I read some of the captions from your photos together? They're quite romantic. David was grinning now, despite his condition. I'd never seen him look so proud of his old mother. Margaret, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that you've been having an affair for 8 months. I understand that you abandoned your husband during a medical crisis to continue that affair. And I understand that you're now asking the woman whose money you stole to bail you out of the consequences of your own choices. I didn't steal anything. That money belongs to both of us. Actually, David spoke for the first time, his voice carrying easily over the speaker. That money belongs to me and my mother, and as of yesterday, you no longer have access to any of it. The sharp intake of breath from the phone was audible even over the hospital's ambient noise. David, baby, you're awake. I've been so worried. Worried enough to cut your vacation short? He asked dryly. I tried to leave immediately when I heard, but the flights, are you booking flights now, Nora? Right now, while we're talking? Another pause. The internet here is very slow. That's funny, I interjected. Because you posted an Instagram story 20 minutes ago. The internet seemed fast enough for that. David closed his eyes and shook his head. Nora, stop. Just stop lying. We know about Kyle. We know about the affair. We know you've been using my money to fund your relationship with him. And we know you chose to stay in paradise instead of rushing home when your husband nearly died. David, please, let me explain. Explain to my lawyer, he said calmly, because this conversation is being recorded and everything you've said is going to be very helpful in our divorce proceedings. Divorce? Her voice pitched higher. David, you can't be serious. You're not thinking clearly because of the medications. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, he said. And what I'm thinking is that my wife just admitted to stealing my money, abandoning me during a medical emergency, and lying about all of it. I didn't abandon you. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to know, David said. You were too busy posting photos with your boyfriend to answer calls from the hospital. The line went quiet, except for what sounded like crying. But I'd heard Nora's manipulation tactics before, and I suspected David had too. Here's what's going to happen, David continued. You're going to find your own way home. When you get here, you're going to find that the locks have been changed and your belongings are packed. You're going to receive divorce papers within the week. David, please, and Nora, if you come anywhere near my children before this is settled legally, I'll have you arrested for abandonment and harassment. He motioned for me to end the call, and I did, cutting off what was building into full-scale hysterical pleading. David lay back against his pillows, looking more relaxed than he had since waking up. Feel better? I asked. I feel free, he said. For the first time in 2 years, I feel free. Sandra Chen arrived that afternoon with a briefcase full of papers and a smile that reminded me why David spoke so highly of her legal skills. She was sharp, efficient, and had clearly been preparing for this moment much longer than I'd realized. How are you feeling, David? She asked, setting up her laptop at the small table by the window. Like a man who just discovered his wife is even worse than he thought possible, David replied. Did Mom fill you in on the latest developments? She did. And I have to say, Nora has made our job considerably easier. Sandra pulled out a thick folder. Abandonment during medical emergency, adultery with evidence, financial irresponsibility, endangering marital assets. This is going to be the fastest uncontested divorce I've ever handled. Uncontested? I asked. Oh, she'll contest it initially, Sandra said. But when she sees the evidence we have, plus the new evidence from her current vacation, she'll settle quickly, especially when she realizes what fighting will cost her. David shifted in his hospital bed. What do you mean? Well, let's start with the basics. You have a prenuptial agreement that becomes void in cases of adultery. You have documented evidence of her affair. You have proof she abandoned you during a medical emergency. And now you have recorded admissions of her using marital funds for personal vacations with her lover. Sandra pulled out a set of photographs. Apparently, Patricia wasn't the only one who'd been busy gathering evidence. But here's the interesting part, Sandra continued. According to the financial records your mother provided, Nora has been systematically moving money from your joint accounts into personal accounts for the past 6 months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but totaling nearly $40,000. I felt my jaw drop. $40,000? She's been planning this for a while, David said grimly. The affair, the money transfers, probably the exit strategy. What she didn't plan for was me having a heart attack and Mom freezing the accounts before she could complete whatever she was planning. Sandra nodded. Which brings us to the really interesting part. Nora made some calls yesterday, after she couldn't access the accounts. Calls to a real estate agent in California. California? David and I said simultaneously. Apparently she and Kyle have been planning to relocate after the divorce. They've been looking at properties in San Diego, using your projected settlement as their budget. David was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So, she wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to take me for everything and disappear with him to California. That appears to be the plan, yes. Using the children as leverage for a larger settlement, then relocating and limiting your access to them. The children, Emma and Jake, who had no idea their mother was planning to uproot their lives for a man they'd never met. I felt a surge of protective fury that surprised me with its intensity. Over my dead body, I said. Actually, Sandra smiled. Over her legal dead body, because none of this is going to happen now. When we file these papers, Nora is going to discover that adultery and abandonment have consequences, especially when there are children involved and when she's been stealing marital assets. My phone rang. Nora again. Want to have some fun? Sandra asked, her eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. David looked at me, then at Sandra. What kind of fun? Answer it, Sandra said, but let me talk to her. As your attorney, I can say things you can't, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. I answered the phone and handed it to Sandra without saying a word. Hello, Nora, Sandra said pleasantly. This is Sandra Chen, David's attorney. I understand you're having some difficulties in the Maldives? The pause was so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Who is this? Nora's voice was small, uncertain. As I said, I'm David's lawyer, and I'm calling to inform you that divorce papers will be filed first thing Monday morning. You're welcome to contest them, of course, but I should warn you that fighting this particular divorce will be expensive and ultimately futile. You can't. David's not thinking clearly. David is thinking very clearly. Clear enough to provide me with recorded evidence of your admissions today, clear enough to document your abandonment during his medical crisis, clear enough to authorize me to take steps to protect his assets and his children from any further damage. Sandra was smiling as she spoke, clearly enjoying herself. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to find your own way home from your romantic vacation. When you arrive, you'll discover that your access to marital assets has been permanently revoked, the locks on the family home have been changed, and your belongings are boxed and waiting for pickup. You can't do that. Actually, we can. Adultery voids your prenuptial agreement's protections, but it doesn't void its restrictions. And abandonment during medical emergency is grounds for immediate asset protection under California law. I watched David's face as Sandra systematically destroyed whatever fantasy Nora had been living in. He looked like a man who just realized he was finally free. But that's not even the best part, Sandra continued. The best part is that all those California real estate listings you've been looking at, all those plans you and Kyle made for your new life, that was all banking on a settlement that no longer exists. The sound coming through the phone was somewhere between a sob and a scream. See you in court, Nora, Sandra said pleasantly, and ended the call. David started laughing, then real laughter that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him that had been locked away for too long. I think, he said to Sandra, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. 3 days later, I was making breakfast in David's kitchen when Emma and Jake burst through the front door with their Aunt Linda, back from their weekend trip, completely oblivious to the family drama that had unfolded. Grandma, Emma launched herself into my arms. Aunt Linda took us to the zoo, and we saw baby elephants. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, I said, holding her tight and trying not to think about how their mother had planned to move them across the country without their father's knowledge. Jake, always more observant than his 8-year-old sister, looked around the kitchen with curious eyes. Where's Mommy? And why are you making breakfast? Before I could formulate an age-appropriate answer, Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Margaret, we need to talk. I settled the children with cartoons and juice boxes, then followed Linda onto the back patio. Linda had always been the practical one in the family. The sister who saw through nonsense with surgical precision. David called me this morning, she said without preamble. He told me about Nora and the divorce. But what he didn't tell me was how we're going to explain this to 2 children who think their mother is at a yoga retreat. I had been dreading this conversation. What did you tell them when they asked where she was? That she was taking care of some personal business and would be back soon. But Margaret, kids aren't stupid. Emma's already asking why Mommy didn't call them yesterday like she promised. Through the patio door, I could see Emma and Jake curled up together on the couch. Emma's protective arm around her little brother as they watched their show. The innocence on their faces made my heart ache. David wants to tell them the truth, I said. Age appropriately, but honestly. And what is the age-appropriate truth? That their mother abandoned their dying father to have a romantic vacation with another man? When Linda put it that way, it sounded even worse than it was, and it was already pretty bad. The truth is that Mommy and Daddy are having some problems, and they're going to live in different houses for a while, I said, repeating what David and Sandra had discussed. The truth is that Daddy loves them more than anything and will never leave them. Linda studied my face. And what about the part where Mommy tried to steal Daddy's money and move them to California without telling anyone? That part stays between the adults for now. Good, Linda said, because I have some information that's going to make this situation even more complicated. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of information? I got a call from my friend Jessica this morning. She works at Family Services. Apparently someone filed a complaint yesterday claiming that David is an unfit father due to his recent medical crisis and that his children are being cared for by an elderly woman with no legal authority. The words hit me like a physical blow. Nora, that would be my guess. She's trying to get the children removed from David's care and placed with social services until she can return and claim custody. I sank into one of the patio chairs, my mind racing. Can she do that? She can try. And if David is still in the hospital and you're the only one caring for the children? Linda left the sentence unfinished, but I understood the implication. What do? We fight back. But first, we need to make sure you have legal standing to care for these children. Sandra is already working on emergency custody papers, but they'll take time. Inside, Jake was giggling at something on television. The sound so pure and happy it broke my heart. These children had no idea their mother was trying to have them taken away from everyone who loved them. Linda, I said quietly, there's something else, something I haven't told David yet. She waited. I think Nora has been planning this for longer than we realized. 6 months ago, she asked me to update my will. Said it would be good for the children's security if I named her as a backup guardian in case something happened to David. Linda's face went pale. Please tell me you didn't. I didn't. Something about the request felt off. But now I understand what she was doing. She was positioning herself to have legal claim to the children and access to my estate if David was deemed unfit or if something happened to him. Jesus. Margaret, she was planning to have you both removed from their lives. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted our conversation. Through the front window, I could see a taxi pulling up, and my blood ran cold when I recognized the figure getting out. Nora was home, and judging by the fury on her face as she stormed toward the front door, she was ready for war. I had maybe 30 seconds before Nora reached the front door. 30 seconds to decide how to handle the moment when the children saw their mother for the first time since her world had imploded. Linda, I said quickly. Take the children upstairs. Now. What? Why? Because their mother is about to make a scene that will traumatize them for life. And I'm not letting that happen. Linda moved fast, scooping up Jake while firmly taking Emma's hand. Come on, kids. Let's go see if Daddy has any good books in his room. But Grandma, the show isn't over. We'll finish it later, sweetheart, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The front door rattled with aggressive knocking, just as Linda disappeared upstairs with the children. I counted to 10, smoothed my hair, and opened the door with the same calm I'd used to face down intimidating doctors and belligerent insurance agents over the years. Nora looked like hell. Her usually perfect blonde hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. But it was her expression that told the real story. Pure, undiluted rage mixed with desperation. Where are my children? She demanded, pushing past me into the house. Your children are safe and cared for, which is more than I can say for their father when you abandoned him. She whirled around, her eyes blazing. I didn't abandon anyone. I was trapped in another country with no money because I what? Protected my son's assets from a woman who was stealing them to fund her affair? That money belongs to me too. Actually, it doesn't. Your prenuptial agreement was quite clear about that, especially in cases of adultery. Nora's face crumpled then, the rage giving way to something that looked almost like panic. Margaret, please, I know how this looks, but you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been planning to leave my son for months. I understand that you were going to take his children and his money and disappear to California with your boyfriend. And I understand that you called Family Services yesterday to try to have these children removed from their father's care. That last accusation hit home. Nora's face went white, confirming what Linda had suspected. How did you? Because unlike you, I have friends who actually care about this family's well-being. Nora straightened, and I could see her regrouping, searching for a new angle of attack. Where's David? Recovering. No thanks to you. I want to see him. I'm sure you do. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to see you. In fact, you're not welcome in this house anymore. This is my house too. Not anymore. Check with Sandra Chan if you have questions about the legal details. Nora's composure finally cracked completely. You can't keep me from my children. I'm not keeping you from anything. Your own choices did that. Mommy. We both turned to see Emma standing at the top of the stairs, her face confused and uncertain. Behind her, Linda was reaching for her, but Emma had heard the shouting and come to investigate. Baby. Nora's voice transformed instantly, becoming the syrupy sweet tone she used when she wanted something. Mommy's home. Emma hesitated, looking between her mother and me with an expression too mature for her 8 years. Why were you yelling at Grandma? We weren't yelling, sweetheart. We were just having a discussion. Come give Mommy a hug. But Emma didn't move. Instead, she asked the question that shattered whatever illusion Nora might have had about controlling this narrative. Mommy, Daddy's in the hospital. Why weren't you here when he got sick? The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of truth that couldn't be sugar-coated or explained away. Nora looked up at her daughter, and for the first time since she'd walked through that door, she seemed to realize that her actions had consequences beyond bank accounts and divorce papers. I was traveling, baby. I came as soon as I could, but Grandma was here. Grandma took care of Daddy. Emma's simple observation carried more judgment than any adult accusation could have. From the mouth of a child came the truth. When it mattered most, Grandmother had been there, and Mother had not. Nora tried to recover. Well, I'm here now, and I'm going to take you and Jake home. This is home, Emma said firmly. And Daddy needs us here. I watched Nora realize that she'd lost more than just her marriage and her financial security. She'd lost her children's unquestioning trust. And unlike court orders and bank accounts, that was something no lawyer could help her get back. The standoff in the living room was broken by the sound of another car in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Sandra Chen getting out of her black sedan with a folder of papers and a determined expression that suggested she'd been expecting this confrontation. Expecting someone? Nora asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Always, I replied calmly. Sandra knocked once before entering, her professional demeanor intact despite the obvious tension in the room. Mrs. Caldwell, she said to Nora with cool politeness. I was hoping to find you here. I'm here to collect my children and my belongings, Nora said, crossing her arms defensively. I'm afraid that's not going to be possible, Sandra replied, opening her folder. I have here a temporary restraining order preventing you from removing the children from their father's custody, as well as a court order for supervised visitation only. Nora's face went from pale to bright red. You can't do that. Actually, we can. And we have. Sandra handed her a set of papers. Your attempt to have the children removed from their father's care through family services while he was hospitalized was ill-advised. I was protecting them. From what? A loving father and grandmother who've been caring for them while you were on vacation with your boyfriend? Emma was still standing at the top of the stairs, listening to every word. I could see her trying to process information that was too complex and painful for a child her age. Emma, sweetheart, I called softly. Why don't you go help Aunt Linda with Jake? But Emma shook her head. I want to stay. I want to understand what's happening. Nora looked up at her daughter, and for a moment I saw something like remorse cross her face. Baby, grown-up stuff is complicated. Are you and Daddy getting divorced? Emma asked directly. The question hung in the air like a bomb nobody wanted to defuse. That's something Daddy and I need to discuss. Nora said carefully. Daddy already discussed it, Emma said with devastating 8-year-old honesty. He told Aunt Linda that you've been lying and that you don't want to be married anymore. I watched Nora's carefully constructed facade crumble as she realized her children had already been told a version of the truth that painted her as the villain she'd actually become. That's not. David had no right to poison you against me. He didn't poison anyone, Emma said firmly. He just told us the truth. Sandra stepped forward. Mrs. Caldwell, I think it would be best if you left now. You can schedule supervised visits through the family court system. Supervised visits? These are my children. Children you abandoned during a family crisis. Children you attempted to have removed from their father's care through false allegations. Children you were planning to relocate without their father's knowledge or consent. Each accusation hit like a hammer blow, and I could see Nora deflating with the weight of her own choices. I want to see David, she said finally, her voice small and desperate. Mr. Caldwell has made it clear he doesn't wish to see you except in the presence of attorneys. Please, Nora turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Margaret, please, I know I made mistakes, but I love my children. I love my family. For a moment, looking at this broken woman begging for forgiveness, I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered my son lying unconscious in that hospital bed, alone because his wife was too busy with her affair to answer emergency calls. If you loved your family, I said quietly, you would have been here when they needed you. I can change. I can fix this. Some things can't be fixed, Nora. Some betrayals run too deep. Emma spoke from the stairs, her young voice carrying a wisdom that broke my heart. "Mommy, did you really leave when Daddy was sick?" Nora looked up at her daughter, and I could see her struggling with whether to tell the truth or try one more lie. "Yes," she whispered finally. "Yes, I did." Why? It was such a simple question from a child who deserved a simple answer. But the truth was too complicated, too ugly, too adult for explanation. "Because," Nora said, her voice breaking, "I made very, very bad choices." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this finally made sense to her 8-year-old understanding of right and wrong. "I think you should go now," Emma said with quiet finality. "Daddy needs to get better, and you make everything sad." And that, I realized, was the most devastating judgment of all, delivered not by lawyers or judges or angry adults, but by a child who had simply observed that her mother's presence brought sadness instead of joy. Nora left without another word, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sandra watched her go, then turned to me. "That went better than expected." "Did it?" "She didn't fight the court orders. She admitted guilt in front of witnesses. And most importantly, the children saw her true character for themselves." I looked up at Emma, still standing on the stairs, looking older than her 8 years. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness she seemed to bring to everything lately. "I'm sad," she said finally, "but I'm not surprised." And that, perhaps, was the saddest thing of all. 2 weeks later, David was home and recovering well. The children had settled into a new routine, and life was beginning to feel stable again. Which is, of course, when Nora decided to play her final card. I was in the garden with Emma, teaching her how to deadhead the roses, when my phone rang. An unknown number, but something made me answer it. "Margaret, this is Dr. Patricia Williams from Riverside Memorial Hospital." My blood ran cold. "Is everything all right?" "I'm calling about your daughter-in-law, Nora Caldwell. She's been admitted to our psychiatric unit following a suicide attempt." The pruning shears fell from my hands. "What?" "She was found in her hotel room this morning by housekeeping. She's stable now, but she's been asking for you specifically. She says she has information about your family that you need to know." I looked at Emma, who was watching me with concerned eyes. "Can you hold on a moment, please?" I covered the phone. "Emma, sweetheart, can you go inside and ask Daddy if he needs anything? I need to take this call." Once Emma was safely inside, I returned to the conversation. "Doctor, I don't understand. Why would she ask for me specifically?" "She claims she has information about threats to your son and grandchildren. She says someone has been trying to force her to leave town permanently. And she's afraid for their safety." This was a new development, and every instinct I had told me it was another manipulation. But what if it wasn't? "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The psychiatric ward at Riverside Memorial was sterile and sad, filled with people fighting battles that couldn't be seen from the outside. Nora was in a small room at the end of the hall, looking fragile and broken in a way that seemed genuine for the first time since I'd known her. "Margaret," she said when I entered, her voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for coming. The doctor said you have information about threats to my family." Nora nodded weakly. "Kyle, he's not who I thought he was." I sat in the chair beside her bed, maintaining a safe distance but close enough to hear her clearly. "What do you mean? When the money got cut off? When I was trapped in the Maldives? He changed. Started talking about how we could get money from David's family other ways." A chill ran down my spine. "What other ways?" "He knows about your financial situation, Margaret. He knows about your investments, your life insurance, your property. He's been researching your family for months." "How would he know any of that?" Nora's face crumpled with shame. "Because I told him. I gave him access to all the financial documents, thinking we were planning a future together. But he wasn't planning a future with me. He was planning a future with my money." I felt sick. "What kind of plans?" "He has connections to people who arrange accidents for elderly people, make them look natural." He showed me articles about other cases. Other families where wealthy seniors died unexpectedly and their assets went to younger relatives. The room seemed to spin around me. "You're saying he was planning to have me killed?" "Not just you," Nora whispered. "You and David. Make it look like a murder-suicide, maybe, or a car accident. Leave the children orphaned so I could inherit everything and take them away." I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process this information. "And you went along with this?" "No. I mean, at first I thought he was just talking crazy because he was angry about the money. But then he started asking specific questions about your routines, about when you were alone, about the children's schedules." "When did you realize he was serious?" "When he showed me the insurance policy he'd taken out on your life. He's been planning this for months, Margaret. Using me to get information about your family." My blood turned to ice. "What insurance policy?" "He somehow got himself listed as a beneficiary on a policy tied to your estate. I don't understand all the legal details, but he showed me the paperwork. If something happens to you, he gets a substantial payout. This was impossible. I'd never signed any documents that would give Kyle Morrison access to my estate or insurance. Nora, I need you to tell me exactly what documents you gave him access to. For the next hour, Nora detailed a systematic campaign of identity theft and financial fraud that made my earlier concerns about frozen bank accounts seem quaint. Kyle had used the information she'd provided to forge documents, create false insurance policies, and position himself to profit from the deaths of people he'd never met. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked finally, because when I realized what he was really planning, I tried to back out. Told him I couldn't go through with it. That's when he told me it didn't matter anymore. He said he didn't need me alive to collect the money. He threatened you. He tried to kill me. Margaret. Made it look like a suicide attempt so if I survived, no one would believe anything I said. But I fought him off and called the hospital myself. I stared at this woman who had betrayed my family in every possible way, who was now claiming to be saving us from an even worse betrayal. "Why should I believe you?" Nora reached into the bedside table and pulled out a phone. "Because I recorded everything, every conversation, every plan, every threat. I thought I was documenting our relationship, but I was actually documenting a murder plot." She handed me the phone. And with shaking fingers, I pressed play on the first recording. Kyle's voice, casual and cold, filled the small hospital room. "The old lady's got to go first. Make it look natural, maybe a fall down the stairs. Then we wait a few months and take care of the son. Car accident, maybe. Something that doesn't leave the kids traumatized because we need them to trust you when you get custody." I stopped the recording, my hand shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. "There are 12 hours of recordings," Nora said quietly. "Everything you need to put him away forever and protect your family." I looked at this broken woman who had betrayed us, who had nearly destroyed us, and who was now potentially saving our lives. "What do you want in return?" "I want you to forgive me," she whispered, "and I want you to help me make sure Kyle never hurts anyone ever again." The FBI arrested Kyle Morrison 3 days later as he was conducting surveillance on my house, presumably planning the accident that would begin his scheme to murder my family for insurance money. The recordings Nora had provided, Nora, combined with the forged documents and fraudulent insurance policies they found in his possession, painted a picture of a man who had turned identity theft and murder into a profitable business model. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, who handled the case, told me Kyle had been operating this scheme in 3 other states with different female accomplices. Nora wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one smart enough to document everything and brave enough to come forward. "Your daughter-in-law saved your lives," Agent Walsh told me as we sat in David's living room, watching Emma and Jake play in the backyard, blissfully unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. "If she hadn't recorded those conversations, we never would have been able to prove intent." David, still recovering but getting stronger every day, shook his head in disbelief. "So, Nora's affair actually saved our lives?" "In a way, yes. If she hadn't been involved with Kyle, we wouldn't have known about his plans until it was too late." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The woman who had betrayed our family had also inadvertently protected us from something far worse. "What happens to her now?" I asked. "She's agreed to testify against Kyle and his associates in exchange for immunity from the fraud charges. She'll serve some time for the identity theft, but considering her cooperation, it'll likely be minimal." "And the children?" Agent Walsh looked at David. "That's between you and the family court, but given everything that's come to light, I suspect custody won't be an issue." Later that evening, after the FBI agents had gone and the children were asleep, David and I sat on his back porch, watching the sunset and trying to process everything that had happened. "Mom," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not seeing what Nora was really like. For letting her isolate you from our family. For not protecting you from all of this." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You couldn't have known. I should have trusted my instincts, and I should have trusted yours." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of suburbia, lawnmowers, children playing, the distant sound of traffic, normal sounds from a normal world that had very nearly been destroyed by the greed of a man we'd never met. "What do we tell the kids?" David asked eventually. "We tell them that sometimes bad people try to hurt good families, but that love and truth are stronger than lies and greed. We tell them that their mother made mistakes, but ultimately did the right thing when it mattered most. And do we forgive her?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know if I can forgive her for what she did to you, to our family, but I'm grateful she found the courage to stop something much worse from happening." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. David and I both tensed. After everything we'd been through, unexpected communications made us nervous. But when I opened the message, it was from Nora. "Margaret, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted you to know that Kyle had a list. Other families he was planning to target after yours. The FBI has that list now, and they're warning those families. Your strength in freezing those accounts and fighting back didn't just save your family. It saved strangers you'll never meet. Thank you for being braver than I was. I hope someday Emma and Jake will understand that their grandmother is a hero. I showed the message to David, who read it twice before handing my phone back. Are you a hero, Mom? I thought about the question seriously. I'm a mother and grandmother who refuse to let anyone hurt her family. If that makes me a hero, then every woman who's ever stood up to a bully is a hero. Then the world is full of heroes. I hope so, I said, watching the last light fade from the sky. I really hope so. Emma appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. Grandma? Daddy? Why are you sitting outside? Just enjoying the quiet. Sweetheart, I said, opening my arms to her. She climbed into my lap, warm and solid and perfectly safe. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, Emma, more than you'll ever know. As I held my granddaughter and watched my son smile for the first time in weeks, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's simply protecting what matters most and refusing to let evil win. The rest, as they say, was just paperwork.